Okay, so it's been a while since I've done a film review, and it seems apt to talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Now, the backdrop to this film, it's Quentin Tarantino's ninth film, and a big draw, I think, is the fact that the two lead stars, male stars, are Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, two of the biggest names in Hollywood. I think that's a big pull of the film. But anyway, there's other big names in the film. Al Pacino has a relatively minor role, um, and Margot Robbie plays the actress Sharon Tate. Now, a big backdrop to this film is indeed the Tate Bianca murders by the Manson family, um, and yet it's a backdrop. It's not the main storyline of the film. As I always say with these videos, if you haven't seen it, there will be spoilers here. What did I like about the film? I liked the scene with Bruce Lee, played by Mike Moe. I thought that was memorable. Um, Basically, this is an homage to the kind of end of the golden era of Hollywood. So, DiCaprio plays a character, Rick Dalton, who is an old Western TV star, and he's now kind of washed up. He's an alcoholic. He's a heavy smoker, and he lives with a stuntman, um, Cliff Booth, played by Brad Pitt. And it's kind of about their journey in a sense that, and they eventually have to go separate paths because DiCaprio's character gets married and they can no longer afford a stuntman. But clearly they're good friends. They have a good working relationship. Um, there's a lot of memorable scenes in the film. One thing that I would point out about this film is the suspense techniques are very good. It's something I always find effective in film. If suspense can be well done. Now, anyone that knows about the Manson case will have been watching this with trepidation throughout because you know the history and you expect something. So I did not expect the twist at the end. I'll come to that in a minute. But so Cliff Booth picks up a young hitchhiker, and she turns out to be one of the Manson cult members, played by Margaret Qualley. And initially, he's attracted to her, but then he finds out she's underage, and he comes to the Span Ranch, which is full of all these hippies, obviously Manson cult followers, and he finds that it's a bit unsettling because he knows the guy that used to work there, so he decides to investigate to see that they're not exploiting him, not taking advantage of him. He's still alive, and he's blind, but he's still alive. Dakota Fanning plays Squeaky Fromme, who was one of the better known Manson cult members, and she later tried to assassinate President Ford. Anyway, he decides to leave, but not before seeing that someone slashed the tire on his vehicle. So he proceeds to beat the crap out of the guy. Bear in mind, this is a stuntman, he's lethal weapon. The scene with Bruce Lee, incidentally, has a showdown with Bruce Lee after Bruce Lee says he could beat Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali. And he takes umbrage with that, so they get into a confrontation, which leads to him being fired as a stuntman. Um, Now, the whole connection with the Sharon Tate thing is that Rick Dalton happens to be living next door to Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate. A very strong performance by Margot Robbie. Now, Tarantino was criticized for this. Number one, any film that deals with the Manson murders is going to be accused of exploitation, but I actually think it handled it quite well. And if you put Tarantino and Manson together, a lot of people would assume, oh, it's just going to be a bloodfest. It's going to be very Tarantino. The interesting thing about this film was it was very Tarantino, but not in the way that you would expect. You'd have to watch it to see what I'm driving at with that. It is not what you would expect. So it's building up to this moment, August 8th, 1969, 50 years ago this month. And those of us who know the history, you could feel the trepidation. You knew it was what was going to happen here, right? So the cult members go up the driveway. What happens? They end up in the house of Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth. They've got the wrong house. What follows is there's a brutal confrontation. Cliff Booth's dog savages them. He pummels them into the wall. Um, One of the girls ends up staggering outside with glass and all in her face. It's pretty brutal. She then falls in the swimming pool of Rick Dalton, who's chilling with his headphones. He doesn't know what's going on until this happens. He runs back inside, gets his flamethrower, as one does, from a prop of one of a World War II film he was working on, and he proceeds to fry her to a crisp. Now, the scene is very brutal, very violent, and that's definitely in keeping with Tarantino's themes. But the obvious thing here is it's alternative history. So then you see, after all that goes down, Jay Sebring, who's one of the murder victims that night, asks what's going on and invites Rick Dalton inside. His stuntman's in hospital from the injuries he got in this scuffle. Goes inside to meet Sharon Tate and her friends. The film closes. And even at that point, I thought, okay, there's going to be something else. They're going to show the actual murders, or so. People who are expecting to see this film and see the Manson murders are going to, in a dark way, be disappointed because it doesn't show them. In this alternative Tarantino universe, the murders never happened. The assailants were brutally murdered. Now, that might be sort of poetic justice, or it may be Tarantino railing against Hollywood. One significant thing, though, is there's a lot of focus on Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate. Tarantino was criticized for the limited number of lines that Robbie got. Um, and critics said that they didn't give the Sharon Tate character any plot. But what Tarantino has said is this was her leading her life. There's one very charming scene, in fact, where she goes into the cinema, watches herself, and she gets a little smile when she sees the people around her, obviously oblivious to the fact she's a star, are enjoying the film. It's a nice scene, and it shows that Tarantino isn't just about violence. There is definitely art there, and I think what's interesting is there are a lot of exploitation movies, so to speak, out there about the Manson case. But Sharon Tate's own family apparently approved of this. They were reluctant at first, but when Tarantino showed them the screenplay, showed him the angle he was taking, they seem to be okay about it. I don't know what Roman Polanski's views on this are, but at the time, shamefully, the press even blamed the victims, saying they brought it on themselves, which is a disgrace. But I actually think, in that sense, by presenting this alternative history, it dealt with it in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Um, and the tragedy, of course, is that never happened. Those seven people, because people forget the La Bianca murders the following night. In fact, there may have even been eight victims or nine. There was other people connected to the murders whose bodies were found later. But it happened, and it was one of the most brutal crimes in American history, certainly in Los Angeles history. It's an interesting film. I say it's Tarantino's best movie? I don't know if I'd say that, but it's definitely a film worth checking out. DiCaprio and Pitt are on full form. They were great. Margot Robbie was great. The guy playing Charles Manson himself, Harriman, I think he's called, Australian actor, looked the doppelganger, incredible. And yet he had a relatively minor role, and that was effective. Tarantino could have made a big thing out of Manson himself. He didn't. So I don't think you can accuse Tarantino of exploiting the notoriety of Manson because he actually had very little screen appearance.